Ladies and gentlemen, a good day to you all. My name is Nadine Sulkowski from the University of Gloucestershire Business School in the United Kingdom, and it is my pleasure to present the following paper on behalf of myself and my co-authors, Michael Fuller, MBE, and Professor Neil Towers. Together, we are leading the Erasmus Plus funded Capacity Building in Higher Education BUILD project. BUILD stands for Building Universities and Leading Disaster Resilience, and I will be introducing the project in this presentation. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, crisis and disaster management is at the forefront of everyone's thinking. Disaster mitigation and response initiatives used to be seen largely as the responsibility of a defined group of agencies, including, for example, governments, emergency services, disaster aid organizations, and specialist organizations. However, responding to the current pandemic has demonstrated that crisis response and resilience is a responsibility of us all. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the higher education sector has seen an expansion of universities' expertise from being providers of education, research, and knowledge transfer to providers of crisis response capacity for partners and stakeholders. Even prior to that, nascent approaches towards delivering disaster mitigation and response capability through community training and volunteering were seen across universities located in areas prone to natural disasters. As we will see in this presentation, there is a call by policymakers to consolidate expertise and to integrate universities comprehensively in disaster mitigation and response activities. This leads us to the purpose of the paper, which is to address initiatives required to enhance the role of the higher education sector in disaster resilience. We will commence with a justification for integrating universities in disaster resilience planning and contextualize this within international policy frameworks on disaster risk reduction. We will then review 4 theoretical perspectives on resilience planning, including systems thinking, multi-stakeholder integration, adaptive governance, and scalability. Next, we will reflect on the insights derived from a series of roundtable discussions involving senior higher education and disaster resilience experts from across Indonesia and Europe. These insights were used to inform the conceptual development of an innovative and scalable disaster resilience framework, which we present at the end. There is a general consensus amongst policymakers that as socially responsible organizations, universities have a duty to reflect on how their educational strategies, research and business development activities, engagement with stakeholders, and their institutional governance relate to the sustainable development goals, and particularly the related disaster risk reduction targets. Additionally, universities are understood to have a duty of care towards the students, staff, and associated communities, and a responsibility to contribute to local and regional socioeconomic development. Universities have strong networks within the public and private sector and with local, regional, and international communities. This, of course, places them into a unique position to not only act as catalysts for research and educational activities, but also to mobilize networks, resources, and specialist expertise in the event of emergencies and during recovery phases. This position is strengthened through their capacity to contribute to knowledge transfer, scenario planning, post-assessment and impact studies, curriculum development, and innovative research initiatives to improve the diverse aspects of disaster resilience as prioritized in local, regional, and national disaster management plans. Governments and supranational institutions are playing a crucial role in fostering policies towards the cohesion and prosperity of society and environmental sustainability. Enhancing resilience is therefore recognized as one of the most important tasks of policy institutions. The European Union, in particular, is playing a leading role in emergency response internationally and is committed to promoting and facilitating the embedding of the UN Sustainable Development Goals around the globe. The EU was a key player in building the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction that has now been adopted by 187 UN member states. In addition, The Emergency Response Coordination Center is overseeing disaster response coordination within and outside of the European Union and remains committed to extending international humanitarian and disaster aid programs further. This is, amongst other initiatives, reflected in the funding of hundreds of international collaboration projects in the broad fields of disaster risk reduction, disaster management, and resilience through the European Commission's several funds. These projects typically bring together educational institutions, the public, private, and third sector, and can act as powerful catalysts for scaling up relevant outputs nationally as well as internationally. However, what remains clear is that more needs to be done to increase designated funds and to improve collaboration, coordination, and innovation capability. The questions that obviously follow are how and where relevant knowledge and technical solutions can be created, and how these can be scaled up for maximum benefit. The same applies to the role of communities and notions of citizenship in building disaster resilience. In what follows, let us consider the centrality of systems thinking, multi-stakeholder integration, adaptive governance, and scalability in resilience planning. Principles of resilience are best understood within the context of a conducive and multi-layered ecosystem where, through its design and the conscious actions of individual agents, resilience becomes what we call self-perpetuating. Designing a powerful disaster resilience framework, therefore, requires a systems approach. Social resilience is understood as the adaptive and learning capacity of individuals, groups, and institutions to self-organize in a way that maintains system function in response to incremental change or acute disturbance. Understanding how individuals, organizations, and communities can successfully adapt to oftentimes crisis-driven change is therefore increasingly regarded as a fundamental responsibility of government policy and management practice. Resilience frameworks thus need to consider the adaptive and learning capacity of individuals, groups, and institutions to self-organize effectively when faced with disturbance as an enabler of resilience. The capacity to adapt is thought to be driven by 6 main attributes. Firstly, knowledge, skills, and learning. Secondly, community networks. Thirdly, people-place connections. And then community infrastructure, diversity and innovation, engaged and adaptive governments. The importance of the latter is particularly significant as adaptive governance requires genuine participation from relevant public, private, and third sector organizations, the development of inter- and intra-sector partnerships, science and government collaborations, as well as leadership, vision, communication, systems thinking, and institutional capacity building. Multi-stakeholder integration is therefore fundamental to resilience planning. The principles of resilience planning emphasize the need for contextualization, the systematic connection of key individuals and entities, continuous learning, and the development of reflective strategies for managing complexity and uncertainty. It thus goes hand in hand with adaptive governance, which we define as flexible and learning collaborations and decision-making processes at multiple levels, with the aim to adaptively negotiate and coordinate management. The term learning collaborations in this context is particularly interesting as it points to opportunities for the scaling up of resilience initiatives through the structured dissemination and wider implementation of outputs, which is described as waves of resilience planning. The disaster resilience framework proposed in this paper is developed as part of the Erasmus Plus funded capacity building in higher education project Building Universities and Leading Disaster Resilience. This project has been designed around the proposition that universities can serve as key players in the consolidation, innovation, dissemination, and future implementation of disaster mitigation and response activities. The development of this framework was iterative, involving the same group of experts interacting as regular key intervals between December 2018 and July 2021. 24 experts in total were drawn from 8 universities from Indonesia, 3 higher education institutions from the United Kingdom, Denmark and Portugal, and 3 independent consulting firms from the UK, Austria and Germany with professional expertise in resilience planning, crisis management and higher education management. The composition of the team was mixed and included rectors, vice-rectors, heads of international partnerships, heads of centers with a focus on disaster resilience, as well as academics with relevant expertise. Topics for discussion included the rationale for creating a disaster resilience framework with universities as key agents in Indonesia, strategies for the development, possible changes in the implementation of the framework, and of course, implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. Cumulatively, Indonesian partner universities have a diverse set of expertise that can be consolidated into a comprehensive disaster resilience framework, as well as a diverse network and close working relationships with key organizations. These include, for example, the National Ministry of Education and Higher Education, the National Disaster Mitigation Agency, non-governmental disaster aid organizations ACT Alliance, the Muhammadiyah Disaster Management Center, and funding platforms Kitabisa and Lazismu. At local level, partner universities have good working relationships with emergency services, including the police, hospitals, the military, and with local businesses and communities. Much of the team's development work was informed by the Indonesian National Disaster Management Plan. This plan recognizes the unique role of universities as one of 8 key priorities, specifically in the areas of disaster management and disaster science and technology. The rationale for enhancing the role of universities is driven by decentralization and the inability for central government to effectively implement disaster management capacity building programs across all of Indonesia's diverse regions. Owing to the local expertise and network, the plan identifies universities as better placed to devise and deliver disaster resilience initiatives that are suitably adapted to the local context. As an example of a policy document designed to inform disaster management that is effectively planned, well-directed and integrated, the National Disaster Management Plan for Indonesia addresses many of the design criteria underpinning the development of a comprehensive disaster resilience framework. This includes, for example, an identification of relevant government agencies and their roles, a consideration of regulatory frameworks, the integration of disaster risk reduction programs into development agendas, and support initiatives for specific groups. And of course, community-based disaster management, the enhancement of the roles of the third sector, and government partner organizations, as well as capacity planning. As such, the plan reflects an acknowledgement of the multi-layered nature of disaster management, the need for a systems approach for integrating a wide range of relevant entities, for engaged and adaptive governments, and of course for scalability. Now, ladies and gentlemen, developing policy recommendations on disaster resilience into a robust disaster resilience framework is a complex and challenging task. The Erasmus Plus CBHE Build project seeks to contribute to the development of such a framework by significantly enhancing the role of the higher education sector in this endeavor. In the initial phase, 8 centers of excellence in disaster resilience across all major regions in Indonesia will act as local enablers in the implementation of a comprehensive disaster resilience framework. Based on the pentahelix model, the vision behind the centers and the disaster resilience framework is to facilitate collaboration between universities and the public, private and third sector through all stages of the disaster management cycle. The disaster resilience framework integrates resilience capacity building at multiple levels, including the individual level, the program level, institutional, regional, and national level. It integrates several aspects of resilience capacity building, including university governance, disaster response and recovery capability, disaster awareness training, curriculum development, fundraising, networking, knowledge transfer, and research innovation, as we can see here in the illustration of the streams of activity pursued by the Centers of Excellence. Concrete outputs include physical spaces for the coordination of disaster resilience activities with a defined institutional governance structure, an information exchange and management model, and target operating model for disaster response, involving internal and external stakeholders, needs-based training solutions, curriculum benchmarks, and national disaster resilience network designed to drive knowledge transfer, innovation, and policymaking. The proposed framework therefore meets several of the aforementioned design criteria for resilience planning, and by being based on a set of common principles and standard is scalable nationally as well as internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.